There is a tense power struggle going on in Pakistan. The Supreme Court has forced out one Prime Minister and put the current one on notice. The military stands accused of wanting to see the politicians cut down to size, and the government is trying to fight back. My guest today on Hard Talk is Aitzaz Ahsan, a lawyer and senior politician from the ruling Pakistan People's Party. He defended the former Prime Minister Yusuf Raza Gilani against his dismissal by the Supreme Court. Where does he believe the balance of power stands in Pakistan? Senator Aitzaz Ahsan, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you again.
Thank you. General overview, has the judiciary become too powerful in Pakistan?
It's certainly become very powerful. Its own interpretation of it is that it's not too powerful beyond its limits. But
So it's very powerful, but not too powerful, because that was my question.
I think it is too powerful. I consider that it has, at times, overstepped its limits.
And is one very clear recent example when they dismissed Yusuf Raza Gilani in June and said you can't be Prime Minister because you have not reopened the investigations of corruption allegations for financial irregularities against the current President Asif Ali Zardari. You think that was a very clear example of the Supreme Court acting beyond its remit?
There were two different sets of or forums that are possible. It's not an issue of corruption, really. It's an issue of forum. What the Supreme Court, I think, ought to have understood is, and what people ought to understand in Pakistan and abroad, is that in the last 500 years, ever since the emergence of the nation state, there has not been one example, and I said so to the Supreme Court from the bar, not one example, where one state has pushed its own head of state or head of government for trial before a court of another state. In fact, the other state and the courts in other states do not even seek to try a head of state of another state because of the concept of sovereign immunity.
So what are you referring to here? The fact that actually the demand is for the Swiss authorities to reopen the investigations against the financial dealings of President Zardari and his late wife Benazir Bhutto. Is that what you're referring to there?
No, exactly. But what I'm saying is that as long as Zardari, I'm just saying, and this is what I said, as long as Zardari is in the incumbent head of state, the constitutionally elected president of Pakistan, and you may like him, dislike him, you may charge him with corruption or charge him with any other offense, he cannot be sent for trial before a Swiss investigating magistrate.
Because that's where the allegation is that the money that he acquired with his late wife is actually being kept. And I have to stress, of course, that President Zardari denies vigorously these allegations.
He denies vigorously these allegations, and there has been no final conviction in that case, despite the fact that several decades passed since the matter was opened. But the point remains that apart from the corruption, what the Supreme Court had to decide and was to consider was whether a head of state of Pakistan can be put up for trial, can be pushed into a trial, to face a trial and to be indicted by a foreign court.
All right.
Any foreign court, Swiss or any other.
We'll come back to the Prime Minister's case in a moment. We're just pursuing President Asif Ali Zardari. Why is it then that you told the New York Times in 2008 that you believed that most of the allegations of corruption against President Zardari were justified? So now you're saying that you believe that the allegations or the investigation should be carried out, but yet you're saying that he shouldn't be put in this position, that he should kind of have immunity. That's inconsistent.
He does have immunity, regardless Article 248 of the Pakistan Constitution has a clause in it, very simple, short clause. Exact words are, no criminal proceeding whatsoever shall be instituted or continued against the President in any court during his tenure of office.
During his tenure of office.
That's all I say.
But do you then believe that when he ceases to be president, rather as we've seen in the French system, that he should stand trial for the allegations of financial misdemeanors?
If the government and the prosecution agencies then believe that there are charges of corruption against him, he should be tried.
So what do you believe? Once he leaves office, you believe that he should cease to have immunity from prosecution and he should stand trial?
He will cease to have immunity from prosecution, both internationally and domestically, on his ceasing to be the President of Pakistan.
And should he be pursued, in your view, domestically, never mind internationally, but domestically, should he be pursued?
If there are charges against him and the allegations against him of any substance whatsoever, of course, any president, Jacques Chirac was not prosecuted as long as he was president. President Sarkozy was not prosecuted as long as he was president. There are 100 other cases in which presidents and heads of state, domestically and in foreign forums, have not been prosecuted during the incumbency of office. That is all I sought from the court, and that is all that the government seeks from the court, that as long as Mr. Zardari is President of Pakistan, no jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction, should be invoked domestically or internationally.
So the Supreme Court was acting wrongly when it said that that the Prime Minister at the time, Yusuf Raza Gilani, should have reopened investigations. They were not acting in a constitutional manner because they weren't abiding by this article that you said.
That is my belief, and I had in fact prepared an appeal within the time of limitation provided for the appeal with 144 questions of law that I had raised against the judgment of disqualifying the Prime Minister dated the 26th of April 2012. But the party decided, for reasons that the client's decision, because he had not been disqualified by that judgment. He had only been sentenced to contempt, and he had served the 32nd sentence. He was sentenced till the rising of the court, and the court rose immediately. Therefore, he decided not to appeal. But I think that judgment is of the 7 learned judges of the Supreme Court has to be reviewed, and sometimes must be reviewed.
Okay, the Chief Justice, Iftikhar Chowdhury, then, what do you think the motivation is then in the Supreme Court in pursuing Yusuf Raza Gilani in the way they did? What would Iftikhar Chowdhury, the Chief Justice's motivation, be?
I think the Supreme Court is taking a very legalistic and narrow view. It's taking a legalistic view, but a very narrow view of the fact that on the 16th of December 2009, it passed a judgment seeking the reopening of the cases in Switzerland against President Zardari. At that time, the government had not contested the case and had not put up its point of view at all in those proceedings. So the government went unrepresented. In fact, deliberately, it went unrepresented. It was its own mistake. But that would not change the constitutional position. So the Supreme Court says... So it was just acting in a very narrow legal way. There was no other agenda in your view?
No,
I don't think there's another agenda. But it is insisting that since in paragraph 178 of the judgment of 16th of December 2009, we had asked you to write the letter, hence write the letter or go home.
It put you in a rather awkward position, didn't it, really? Because when Iftikhar Chowdhury, the Chief Justice, was removed by President Musharraf at the time in 2007, you were the person then, as the leader of the Bar Association in Pakistan, very senior lawyer, who led the demonstrations and campaigned very heavily for Iftikhar Chowdhury to be reinstated, and he was in 2009. And yet here you were, defending the Prime Minister, Yusuf Raza Gilani, against the orders of Iftikhar Chowdhury. That's a bit of an odd position to find yourself, isn't it?
Well, it's not a difficult position to be in, because I was arguing on behalf of law and the precepts of law in 2007 and until 2009 before the Supreme Court, and I got no doubt my arguments were persuasive enough then.
But you changed your mind then, clearly. You were saying we've got to have the rule of law, Iftikhar Chowdhury must do his job, and yet when he was doing his job, in his view, by telling Yusuf Raza Gilani he should reopen the corruption allegations, you said, well, actually, I don't agree with you, and I'm going to defend Yusuf Raza Gilani right against that decision.
No, but that's my right to defend it. I think what I did then was support the law in supporting the judiciary. I think what I did now was support the law in defending Yusuf Raza Gilani, because it's not a question of corruption, it's a question of immunity and sovereign immunity, and the forum, whether there is a forum on this earth which will try any head of state.
But it's inconsistent, isn't it? I mean, you know, for instance, in The Nation, a respected Lahore-based English language daily, there was an article that said what is ironic is that Aitzaz Ahsan, the very man who bravely marched with his brother lawyers to restore the Chief Justice Iftikhar Chowdhury, is helping the Prime Minister, Gilani, to flout the same Chief Justice orders.
Well, if the same Chief Justice passes orders that are not in accordance with the Constitution, I have a right at least to argue before the court that these orders ought to be kept in a state of suspension only until Zardari is the President of Pakistan. That is all that I would say.
No diminution in your stature then when you have this kind of thing written about you? About the irony, perhaps the inconsistency?
There certainly has been controversy, Zainab. There has been controversy about my position and the kind of contradiction you think comes about. But I think there is no contradiction at all. I stood for the law when I stood with Iftikhar Mohammad Chaudhry, and I stand for the law when I stand before Iftikhar Mohammad Chaudhry.
And where do you stand now then? The new Prime Minister, Raja Pervez Ashraf, has also been put on notice by the Supreme Court that unless he also complies with their order regarding the corruption allegations against the President, he'll also be thrown out.
I think the Supreme Court is left with no other option but to throw him out.
So he will go, will he, Ashraf? I mean, August the 8th, around that time is when they're going to decide.
Not on August the 8th. On August the 8th, it is likely that he'll be issued a show cause notice.
That's right.
That formality has yet to be undertaken of issuing a formal show cause notice.
So he could be thrown. I mean, hasn't the government, though?
The Supreme Court has no other option after the judgment of 26th April 2012, but to disqualify any Prime Minister who refuses to write that letter.
Hasn't the government just passed a new law to protect senior figures in the government from being ousted by the judges?
It's not that. It's not like that, but I have...
They're taking protective measures, though, aren't they, now, to prevent that?
In the Senate, I spoke against that law. By the way.
You spoke against it. So you think it's right that the judiciary should just oust these prime ministers one after the other?
No, not that. But what that law presumes to do, tries to do, is to provide an exception for just the offense of committing contempt of court. Only with respect to that one offense, it provides an exception for certain office bearers. The Constitution does not permit an exception, because the Constitution says in Article 204 that any person who does ABCD commits contempt. By law, subordinate to the Constitution, contempt of courts Act tends to say that certain people will be exempt from the term any person.
All right, so the possibility then that the court then has no choice, you say, than to see the new Prime Minister, Raja Pervez Ashraf, also be dismissed. So we'll see what happens on that. But just what about the military? Because at the time, at least certainly in late December last year, the Prime Minister at the time, Yusuf Raza Gilani, warned of what he said were conspiracies to overthrow the government. He said there can't be a state within the state. They have to be answerable to this parliament. So what about the military? Where do they stand in this power struggle between the judiciary and the politicians? Because the implication there is that the military is siding with the judiciary in wanting to see the politicians cut down to size.
just one sentence on the previous discussion, and that is simply this, that were Raja Pervez Ashraf, the present incumbent Prime Minister, to be treated differently from Yusuf Raza Gilani, Yusuf Raza Gilani would have good grounds to file a review petition
and be
before
reinstated
the court
as Prime
and
Minister.
say, what mistake did I do? Why do you exempt him?
Musical chairs for your Prime Ministers, right?
Yeah,
so he could
but
come back.
And as a lawyer, I would advise him to do that, and he ought to come back if the Supreme Court takes a different view about a different person.
Okay, so on this question of the army, because we have had PP officials and also the former Prime Minister say that the army is siding with the judiciary in trying to undermine the government. Why is there that sense amongst the Pakistan People's Party, of which you're a senior member, the ruling party?
I personally don't think that the army is playing any particular role. The army in Pakistan is itself involved and locked in a battle. It's fighting a war. It's really fighting a war in the northern areas of northern parts of Pakistan, northwestern
the
parts of Pakistan.
militants, you mean, you're talking about that?
The Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, and they're fighting a war that is causing a lot of hemorrhage to the army. The army is hemorrhaging. The people are dying.
That is no. But in terms of they're a very powerful institution, obviously, in Pakistan. And let's face it, for most of its 64-year history, Pakistan has been governed for a good chunk by the military. So how politicised is it? Is it somehow siding with the judiciary against the government?
Let me tell you one thing clearly. As a student, I opposed the first military dictator, Ayub Khan. As a young man, I refused to join the civil service under Yahya Khan because it was a military government, there was an offer. Under Ziaul Haq, the third dictator, I spent long tenures in jail opposing him.
So you are basically,
and under
what you're saying
Musharraf,
is you're opposed to the
military rule. But right now, let me tell you, I don't think the army, the military, is really sort of edging on the judiciary or the judges, although there can be perhaps it's axiomatic that no martial or military intervention can take place without an endorsement of the judiciary in Pakistan. Each martial law in Pakistan, which is each violation of the constitution, has been endorsed by the judiciary and the judges.
So when Ilyas Khan, who is in the BBC's Islamabad bureau, when he says that the army is seen behind many of the legal battles with politicians, you don't think that's an accurate assessment? I
don't see that, but if it were to be said that a lot of people do see that, I would probably accept that statement, but I personally see that.
But actually, I mean, President Musharraf, or former President Musharraf, actually told me on BBC World News that he actually believes that the army does have a role to play in governing the country because he thinks it's the only institution that is strong enough. And when you look at public opinion in Pakistan, the army, let's face it, is very popular. I mean, in a 2012 Pew Research survey, 77% of Pakistanis said that they thought that the army was a good institution.
You see, and yet those polls which show the People's Party at something below 20% are ousted by the electoral results, as in this most recent election of the Prime Minister, ousted Prime Minister's son from a constituency in Multan. He's been re-elected. So these polls, I don't know where they come from.
Well, I don't know, because I mean, now at the moment you've got the PPP is not doing very well at all. If you look at the approval ratings of the President himself, they are rock bottom, something like 14%, gone down dramatically from 2 or 3 years ago when it was in, approval ratings were around 64% or so. So there's no question that the PPP is deeply unpopular.
It is under a cloud, no doubt. But let me also point out that every by-election in the Punjab, which is ruled by Muslim League Nawaz, viciously opposed to the People's Party, and by Shehbaz Sharif, has been won by the Pakistan People's Party.
Okay, that's your home province, isn't it, Punjab? But just you say, under a cloud, is it the fact that these corruption allegations, not only against the President, but also other PPP members, are really undermining the Pakistan People's Party, even weakening it?
They have a telling effect, no doubt. The allegations have a telling effect. And I wouldn't deny that. But I think that Pakistan People's Party, when compared to other protagonists and other players in the field, will get Sindh, will get southern Punjab, will play out in central Punjab, will be in government, in a coalition government in the Pakhtunkhwa and a coalition government in Balochistan.
Because elections are due, well, I mean, this mandate for this current parliament ends in March next year, and then elections have to be held 90 days after that, so say by about May. And if this government, this parliament rather, does complete that, it will be the first time ever that a civilian parliament has completed its 5 years in term.
Yeah, and that will be good for democracy, and I think it will bring down the fears and reduce the fears of military intervention and the army's overbearing role. The army is on the back foot itself, involved in a war, and with all this economic problems, these economic problems at the moment, particularly the shortage of power.
Some people going for about 20 hours a day without electricity in the intense
rural
heat
areas,
of Ramadan,
yes,
in rural
areas. And
that's very difficult for
it's
them.
very difficult for anybody to think, I'll take over tomorrow and suddenly there will be power and suddenly there will be energy, suddenly every generator will be, every electric supply company will be providing power, and there'll be everything will be lit up and working.
The power supply is a big challenge for whoever is in government. But just going back to what you said about the ruling Pakistan People's Party being in good shape, and that if it does survive, the 5-year parliament does survive, it's good for democracy. How democratic is the PPP? Because frankly, the party of Zulfikar Bhutto, then Benazir Bhutto became prime minister. Now we see her widower is president. Her son Bilawal is being groomed for leadership, also one of his sisters and so on. Is that really democracy?
There are two things. One is the South Asian pattern. Look at Jawaharlal, Motilal Nehru.
In India, in Bangladesh, you have a similar system of
Motilal Nehru,
nepotism,
Jawaharlal
yes.
Nehru, Indira Nehru Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, and now the younger.
That's the case.
Children.
It's a trend in South Asia,
it's
but
South
it's not
Asia.
democratic.
It's not
democratic,
necessarily
is it?
democratic, but there's another way of democracy in the Pakistan People's Party. I opposed the party. I led a movement against the Pakistan People's Party. I refused to join the parliamentary elections in 2007. I refused to come into the Senate in 2008 until the judges were, and the Chief Justice was reinstated. I stormed Islamabad and led two long
my
marches.
Question to you was, you're saying, but my question was, the People's Party, the PPP, Pakistan People's Party, is not democratic,
no,
is
just
it? Like other parties in South Asia,
Zainab, there is, I'm still not only in Parliament, not only in the Pakistan People's Party, I'm in Parliament. The voices of dissent are heard. There are voices of dissent in the party which are heard. So there is a democracy of a different variety. There may not be an actual poll for every office, except for the lower offices. For the highest offices, there may not be. But there is a democratic environment. There is dissent, there is disagreement, there is the loud debate within the party. And I think that is something that is of the nature of democracy of a different variety, of a South Asian variety.
Senator Aitzaz Ahsan, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.